but I suspect he was poisoning me. I'm a psychologist. Could I have not seen what I just went through? I knew that what that meant is he's going to start hunting. That's what he called it. He actually saw finding new women as hunting, likened himself to a wolf. I assumed everybody was cooperative, good-natured, and wanted good things for other people. They're capitalizing on that. We have a lot of content about narcissistic mothers, but where did these women come from? We don't seem to put it together that they had to get married and have children and that they have a relationship with somebody. So that's why I think we miss the queen bees and the mean girls.
Dr. Kerry McAvoy, what do we need to know about your life experience to understand your professional work now?
So to kind of back everybody up, I have a PhD in clinical psychology and a private practice for about 25 years. Had a family and things were going well. And if I had not been interrupted by cancer, that's where I would still be. I'd still be living in that state, probably still seeing clients and now having maybe even grandkids. About 11 years ago, my late husband was diagnosed with a rare terminal cancer. And in a matter of 5.5 months, he was gone. So it's a kind of cancer that very rarely strikes people. And as a result, there wasn't any treatment for it. And we were facing the end of his life at 52. So my whole world basically was destroyed. So I felt devastated. And as part of that process, I wanted what I had back. And I started dating really rapidly and fast. And I also closed my practice. I knew I wasn't in shape to go back to see patients because people don't say this about grief, but grief really tears you apart and it leaves you with a lot of rage. So I was too angry to be in the office. I knew I'd be jealous of other people's seemingly decent lives. I couldn't imagine listen to somebody being depressed and struggling over normal relationship issues when I coveted being in their position. So I closed my practice and I started dating super fast, hoping to sort of recapture what I had lost. And interestingly enough, I had been well trained on personality disorders. I had an unusual graduate training experience and also practiced. I had seen personality disorders, but what we didn't talk about in the field is what happens when somebody's living with a person with a personality disorder. So I was unaware that there is interpersonal harm that happens in these relationships. And about a year into the dating, I met what I thought was a fabulous, charismatic person, felt madly in love. I didn't know that I was being love bombed. I could tell he had a lot of narcissistic traits. I didn't see that as necessarily a risk, even though I knew it would make life hard. But I thought to myself, all relationships are hard. So why would this be anything harder than anything else? And I got into a relationship with somebody, and it wasn't until I'd married him that I found, and a year later, I found out that he was living a double life and that he was seeing many women on the side. I was just one of many. And it wasn't until 2 years into the relationship that I discovered that he had probably married me for the money that I had inherited from my life insurance from my late husband. So then it was all about trying to extricate myself from this really scary, even dangerous situation. So I got out of that. And as I got out of that, and that was about 6-7 years ago, I thought, what in the world just happened? I'm a psychologist. Could I have not seen what I just went through? I don't even know what to call what I went through. I didn't have the words for it. I didn't know that at that time, trauma bond was really a new word. Patrick Carn had his book out called Betrayal Bonds, so he wasn't even calling a trauma bond. I'd never heard of narcissistic abuse. That really wasn't quite a thing in 2019. So what I did was I started to write, because I already had been writing before, to try to make sense of what I went through. And as I was writing and stumbling around doing all of this sort of trying to make sense of the gaslighting and the deception, and I didn't even know that I experienced intense coercive control. I mean, a lot of that I didn't realize. But as I was stumbling around doing all of that, that's when I fell into social media that was starting to talk about this new thing, narcissistic abuse. And then from there, it's like, oh, then the lights started going on for me. And then I started realizing. So then after that, I was like, you know what? I'm not the only one suffering. A lot of people are suffering. And I really would like to be a part of helping them get out of something that I struggled so hard to get out of and didn't understand what was happening to me.
Wow. So you had professional training in understanding personality disorders, but it was the behavior in relationships of the personality disordered individual that was outside of the scope of your education?
Exactly. I had a very unique training because that's not actually often what most people would say who are psychologists. If you'd ask them how much education do they have on personality disorders, they'd say minimal. I mean, they probably learned it in psychopathology. But I actually took classes on borderline personality dynamics, on personality types. I had a really fantastic graduate program that brought in specialists who are doing a lot of critical thinking about the makeup of these individuals and trying to understand why they were the way that they were. But what we didn't talk about in these classes, so I can tell you a lot about what happens developmentally, that's why I know what I know, is because I had this really great training. And that's now we're knowing that a lot of this is a kind of a biosocial problem. So at that point still we blamed mom way too much, but we were really talking about them from what happens to the consolidation of self. How are they kind of, structurally set up at the core? What drives their motives? I had classes that talked about that. But what we didn't talk about was the fact that they were using relationships as scaffolding to stabilize themselves from a very dysregulated internal sense of self or lack of sense of self.
Yeah. So this gap then in the space between your technical education and your practical experience, what were some of the elements that you needed to fill in? Because I think a lot of people, they can really study this stuff. Even as amateurs, we can watch a lot of videos. We can learn all the red flags and things like that. But then to go from there to practically understanding it, what was filling that in for you?
Yeah, I think one of the things we don't fully appreciate and understand is the degree that how our sense of self is derived and changed in relationships. We often think of ourselves as almost like silos, like you're you and I'm me, and then you're going to walk away and be kind of contained, and then I'm kind of contained to who I am. But that's not actually how it works. We're actually more of I wouldn't say we're completely an open loop, but we're a semi-open feedback loop for more information. And we're always reassessing and redefining ourselves constantly in the moment. And so what wasn't discussed in these classes and what wasn't discussed in even my postgraduate training as I was getting ready to finish my doctorate, in the sense of being licensed as a licensed psychologist, because one of the things that has to happen is not only do you get a PhD and you do a dissertation, but you have to have a lot of clinical experience. Just like a doctor has residency, you go through your version of that as well as a psychologist. We're required by many states I was required to have 2 years post-doctorate experience before I was allowed to be licensed. And then I had to sit for another exam. So it's a very lengthy process to become a psychologist. But in all of this experience and training, nobody's saying, hey, when you get into these relationships with somebody who doesn't have a really solid core sense of self, who is, I'm going to use the word shame, but I can even talk about what do I mean by shame? Because I don't mean like, oh, they feel worthless and they're terribly insecure people. No, they're not. But they are shame-based in the sense that they are worried about loss of status, loss of control. So in that way, so we're going to use that word that way. In the shame-based individual, what they're doing is they're utilizing relationships to consolidate their sense of self. And what they'll do with all the parts of themselves that they either feel shaky around or feel bad about or dislike, they're going to use you as the container of that and turn you into that for them. So over time, your sense of self is being fragmented and deteriorating in response to being in the relationship with them.
Yeah, I've heard you speak before about this need for belonging as being something that is weaponized. You don't have to be too specific, but what about that was happening that was in that gap between your training and your practical experience?
Yeah, so I don't mind sharing what happened to me personally. So let's even back up further. I came from a home, and my family is not the most healthy family in the world. It was quite neglectful. There was abuse that happened as a kid, and there was gaslighting. I experienced quite a bit of gaslighting as a kid. And I grew up realizing that if I was really compliant and strove for perfection, that things tend to go better, that made my life smoother. So I already was a pretty easygoing, pretty compliant person. And my sense of self, because I'd kind of grown up in a home with people who also did some of these same dynamics, I'd learned that I was okay as long as the family was okay. If I could help make them stable and make things go easier, then life got easier for me, and I felt better as a person. So my sense of self was a little too suggestible, or maybe too In fact, my ex would say, English was his second language, so he'd say, you're without malice. I think if I was to translate what he really saying is, you're gullible and naive. So I was a little too suggestible and too easygoing around things in order to try to keep the peace. I think that's a great way. I was a really great person at keeping the peace and maybe a bit of a caretaker. So what I didn't appreciate is when you get into these relationships with somebody who's dysfunctional like this, then if you're malleable like that, then you're going to start to assume I'm the problem. What can I do to sort of save this? How can I save the relationship because I don't want to have things fall apart for me? That feels like a failure to me. You start to really own all the consequences of what's happening in the relationship without realizing, no, this other person's doing it. It has yes, it has something to do with it. You're experiencing it, but you didn't make them do those things. They did them all on their own. And they're really holding you accountable for things that they're not holding themselves accountable. And you're not responsible for the things that they're actually being irresponsible around.
Yeah. So I think I have some ideas about how this might play out, but what would you say were some specifics so that people could have examples
of how that happened?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So early on, I found out he was cheating, and he said that he was insecure and that it was my relationship with other women that was making him feel really shaky, and that I should cut off some of my best friends so he felt less insecure and he'd be less tempted to see other people.
Wait a minute. He said that your friendships with other women.
Yes.
Friendships.
Yes.
Were the driving force in his emotional
insecurity.
Space
Yep.
that was leading him to have extramarital affairs.
Yes. At that time, I didn't know he was still having extramarital affairs. I thought we'd just gone through treatment. So
Okay.
I thought he was sober, and that I would wanted to support his sobriety, of course.
Okay.
Sort of to me, okay, it's not quite equal. People are like, yeah, but these are friendships. So why is he threatened by friendships? Well, they want to isolate you and cut you off to increase the control. That's the ultimate goal is if I'm not talking to anybody else and I can't correct the narrative and I can't validate my reality and I have no place to go and I'm feeling really upset. I mean, that really probably was his motive, but he made it sound like my relationships was jeopardizing and threatening our marriage, our relationship. Mm-hmm. And that if I wanted to preserve his sobriety, then I would cut these other relationships off.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, being a supportive partner and really wanting him to be sober, I did that. I literally did that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he knew something about your unique psychology that
Yes.
would be a button that he would be able to push and get you going. If it had been some other issue, he would have tried it to get a chance at isolating you.
He did know that was something that I was sensitive to, about that I didn't want to provoke jealousy in other people. He was aware of that about me. And so he pushed and leaned into that. You're exactly right, Brad, about that, is that they study you. I mean, they're master manipulators and they know what your hot buttons are, and they will literally lean into your greatest insecurity. So if you're very self-conscious about something, like here's another example he tried to make me feel bad about, and frankly, you cannot make me feel bad about it. I'm sorry. Good luck with this. He wanted to insinuate that I was an excessive packer. We took a lot of trips because I was trying to preserve our connection. So we literally went away a lot. So we'd have to pack a lot. And he tried to imply that I overpacked. I don't care you tell me that. It really doesn't mean anything to me. It's not a hot button for me. So make fun of me. I don't care. But I bet you, here's what I think. I think it was a holdover from another relationship. And that it worked with this other person, so that's why he kept bringing it up. But to me, I just laughed because I thought it was stupid. I'm not an overpacker. I don't have that many. He was the one that had too many shoes. He was you know what I'm saying? I just thought it was hilarious. But so there's where he kind of fell apart, and he wasn't his usual really good self at being manipulative, but they're very good at that. I know the woman that he was seeing in our marriage, it's there's one main person that was sort of the girlfriend, the mistress. And I know that it was really a big deal because he talked about a lot about how his dad wanted to have homemade tortillas in the house. They're Mexican. And how his mother, when the dad came home from these business trips, would go to all this effort and make homemade tortillas. Well, I happened to catch that one of the texts that this girlfriend made was she was making him homemade tortillas. And I have a feeling that where she got it, though, was around her cooking. Now, I never bothered to cook. We always went out because I told him right up front, I'm not cooking. I'm not going to try to figure out what your tastes are and make things for you. But she was. And I have a feeling that's where she got a lot of the abuse, that he worked on her over that to make her feel bad.
Okay. Whatever insecurity you could find. Mm-hmm. And then the trips thing is interesting too, because what a lot of these types will do as a strategy is to get you out of your usual space and to take you traveling on trips, things like that. So if you go on a trip and you don't pack enough, then you are that much more dependent on him for things as well, I would think.
Yeah, that wasn't a dynamic I experienced with him. Usually trips for us was where we reconnected and things felt calmer and better, which is why I kept trying to take them. When we were in the day-to-day life, because one of the things about narcissists as well, he's a psychopath, by the way. He's a narcissistic psychopath.
Yeah.
But narcissists and psychopaths share in common is they're very bored. They're constantly novelty seeking. So like day-to-day life for them feels too humdrum and they're looking for excitement. And so what would happen is I could feel him starting to drift and I could feel my sense of threat increasing because I knew that what that meant is he's going to start hunting. That's what he called it. He actually saw finding new women as hunting and likened himself to a wolf. And I knew that he would be going out and looking for somebody new to sort of hit on. And so I was more at risk and that our relationship was at risk. So if I could keep him busy, keep him distracted, then I felt safer.
Okay. And so the travel, a form of entertainment then to do that and to keep you both busy.
Yeah.
Even if it does isolate you from your normal life.
Yeah. I already was isolated. I was living in a foreign country. So that part, I already had successfully happened. And near the end, I mean, I don't know how much you know of my story, but I suspect he was poisoning me. Are you aware of that?
Tell me more.
So what we did is I had already been in the rental business back in the day with my our late husband. So he and I had owned properties and were becoming landlords. And I really enjoyed that part of it. And I was running the business aspect and I really enjoyed that. So in addition to being a psychologist, we were also doing this rental business. So when I met my ex, I thought, well, why not take it up a level and do something I always had a fantasy about and do vacation rentals. So that's why that was my suggestion to move to Mexico. And it was my suggestion that we open a business down there and start to own properties and then run them as vacation rentals. And that's what we did. But what I didn't know is when we set up the Mexican corporation was that when they asked how to separate the partnership, because I had to have a Mexican national as part of the business, as an owner of the company for a Mexican company. I didn't understand that I needed, since I was providing all the capital, that I needed not to share that aspect of the administration. So since it was like 99.9% of my capital, it was no percent of his capital, that I needed to make the split like that. And I didn't. I made him 50% owner. So here we are down there. And we also learned while we were down there that if, first, God forbid, something bad were to happen to one of us, that Mexican government puts properties into escrow where they consume the estate in the court dealings. So to avoid that, you need to have a will.
Okay.
So I set up a will and make him an heir to the company.
I see where this is going. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then shortly after, I started getting really radically sick in a very bizarre way. I even ended up being hospitalized at some point. And I realized near the end, a year into the relationship, I realized that I had white lines across all my fingernails. And in addition, I had all the other, a very bizarre group of symptoms, whole list of things going wrong, that I was getting sick, actively quite sick. So sick that when I got out of the marriage, and I don't know if you know this either, the way I got out was my oldest son was diagnosed with leukemia, and I was rushed home to be with him. And the hospital staff taking care of him pulled me aside and said, "There's something wrong with you. We're afraid you're going to collapse on us. You need to be seeing somebody. There's something really wrong with you." So I knew that something was wrong with me, but I didn't realize that I was probably ingesting over a long period of time arsenic, that I was probably being doped on a regular basis and being fed that. And I have talked to two poison control specialists who agreed that my symptoms fit a heavy metal profile, particularly arsenic.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
when I interviewed he'd been married more than once. And one of the women he rarely talked about, he rarely said a word about her. So I was super curious to talk to her. Finally had an interview with her, was able to talk to her on the phone. And spontaneously in the middle of the interview, she says to me, "I think he was poisoning me." So I hadn't been
She said that she believes this about herself.
Yes. And she didn't know that I thought that about myself. She just spontaneously says, "I think he'd been poisoning me."
Wow.
And I about dropped the phone. There it is. I wasn't the first. He'd practiced this before. So near the end of the relationship, back to the isolation that you were talking about, I started to have this, we were getting ready to buy another property. It was even further away from where we were at. It was going to take us out of the town that we'd been living for the past year and a half and out of the community that I'd built in this town, which had a lot of expats in it. And I started having this intuition, this almost like premonition. And it would say, Kerry, if you move, something's going to happen to you and nobody will even know. Nobody will even know why you're gone. And I found out after I got back recently, I talked to the kids because he pulled them aside to sort of say to them, he pulled them aside to say, hey, your mom and I have had some problems, but I'm working on it. And what I found out was that he pulled them aside and said, hey, I think you know your mom's been really sick lately. So he's setting up a story.
Yeah. And he's telling different people different stories.
Yeah, but preparing people to sort of have this story about why I suddenly got very ill. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was scary. And the hospitalization I had, the nurse came, it was a male nurse, and said, I don't think you understand how, they spoke English, I don't think you understand how very sick you are. And I said, no. And he said, but your white count is so high and we can't find out a reason why. And he said, it's like you have appendicitis but we can't find the source of the infection. Well, and this was early in when this happened, and one of the symptoms of arsenic is an elevated white count.
Mm-hmm. And he has all this financial incentive because you fronted the capital for the business. And he likely targeted you in the first place because of financial incentive as well.
Yes, because I put on my dating profile I was a widow. Mm-hmm. And then he told me on the first date he'd been researching widows. Now, I heard he wants to understand me. That's what it would mean if I said that. I didn't know. No, he meant like, no, I have been, filtering for widows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, boy. I've had Donna Anderson on the show from Love Fraud. And she tells the story, too, of her guy who was this serial guy who would pick up career women and then just take them for money. And he ended up taking millions of dollars from several wives over the course of maybe a decade or more. But the financial thing, it's amazing the lengths that they'll go to.
Yeah. I kept thinking, because he was so concerned when we were dating, I want you to have a prenup. I want you to have a prenup. And then I went and talked to an attorney about having a prenup. And they said, it really doesn't do what you think it's going to do. And here's the pros and cons. And I'm not for sure that it's really beneficial. And besides, by the way, it wouldn't have made a difference because the property was in Mexico. It was about a company. We were battling over a company, not battling over my assets. I never shared my assets with him, but I put all this capital into the company. That was governed by Mexican law. And the law was, because I set it up the way that I set it up, 50-50, I didn't know better, that by law, he had the right to the 50%. Now, here's the other thing that I've learned about Mexico that I didn't know. Attorneys are really good at sort of shaping the law the way that they want in Mexico. So if I'd gone to a different one that was sort of a different perspective, by the way, the attorney I went to, divorce attorney, was the same group who also created the corporation. So they had an investment with protecting the fact that their paperwork was legitimate, which I didn't think about that. See, now I'm way more savvy these days. I'm not like, okay, who does this benefit? Yeah. Well, if I had gone to somebody else, another attorney I met, she said, well, where's the paperwork that shows where the capital came from? A government would require that to show the paper trail because there's a lot of money laundering in Mexico. Are we surprised by that? So she'd say, we'd want to prove that this actually was legitimate money that was put into this company. Where's that paperwork? And I said, well, there isn't any paperwork. It goes, well, that needs to be there. And then she said, we would definitely show that he contributed zero and you contributed all of it. But see, I didn't have the right people behind me to protect me. And I didn't even know that I needed that, which was really hard because let's go back to the narcissistic abuse. When you're in these relationships, these are sort of the little chinks that they are able to sort of get their fingers into, that when you try to explain it to somebody else, look how long we've taken to talk about this. I had to get into all the nuts and bolts where you'd say, well, why just give him half of the company? Well, why would he do that? I'm letting him have half of the money. And then, well, can't you go out and earn more? Well, I'm in my 50s. Do I want to go back and work really hard? Besides, that's from life insurance. Do I really want to say that my husband's death meant nothing and give this person who doesn't deserve it half of the income that he never, why should he benefit? This should go to but the outsiders end up thinking, oh, it's simpler than it is. No, it's not simpler because they're very, very good at, they're researchers often. They often really know where the best leverage points are. They're very good at tipping the power imbalances into their favor, and they're very good at leveraging the moment and making you feel awkward and uncomfortable. They'll take a socially sensitive moment and move into the opposite worst direction and know that you won't tolerate it, so you're going to cave and roll in that moment. And that's what people don't appreciate about these relationships. So it's really easy for the outside world to judge, but if they'd sat in the same position, they'd be doing the same thing as the victim's doing.
Right. Yeah, the deck is stacked so deep.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Kerry, we've talked now about this gaslighting in the environment, in the home environment, the isolation. What else was sort of in that gap between your professional training and the real experience?
Well, the other one is coercive control, which at the time I learned, I called it ambient abuse, which is another way to think about it. But what I didn't really understand as experiencing coercive control. And I think most people don't understand that either. They end up thinking, well, you just say no, and then that solves the problem, but it isn't that simple. Because what it is essentially a person using all sorts of methods, often very emotional, intimate methods, like connectedness and how you feel about them, how safe you feel, and swing you into doing things the way that they want them to be done. And often in the beginning, it's done sweetly in a way that makes you almost feel sort of rude for not accepting that help. But what they're doing is they're quietly pulling you under their control without you really fully realizing it. It happened right away on my first date, and I didn't even realize that this is what I was experiencing. So for the first date, he came to my area, and it's near a really beautiful beach area. And so we decided to go out and spend a day in the beach. And I had loaded up with all the picnic stuff, like the picnic basket, the umbrella, the blanket, all of that. And he insisted he carry all of it down to the lake instead of having the two of us carry it together. And he said, no, it's your turn to be taken care of. That sounds really awesome. But what I didn't appreciate was that he's establishing he's in control and that I'm to follow his command, that he's being very directive with me.
Yeah.
And it showed up things around, he insisted he wanted to help me in and out of the car. And you'd think, well, that's sort of a chivalrous thing to do. Isn't that a wonderful man thing to do? Okay, but for me, I have bad knees, and it was hurting my knees. And he was doing it for image control and a way to sort of like say that I needed him. And it was, again, to sort of set up this dependency on him. And then it got more weird around grocery shopping. So he would insist he shop with me. He would insist I stand back and have him put the things on the conveyor belt. He wouldn't allow me to put the things on the conveyor belt and help with that. And then he'd insist that he carry the groceries out to the car and that even carry them into the house. I had to stand and watch him do that. So it starts to be about all of these like little ways of control. And next thing I know, I'm hearing that I need to wash clothes in a certain way and then hang them in a certain way, hang them by color, hang them in a certain direction. Next thing I know, I'm being screamed at because the things in the refrigerator aren't put in the right order and put in the right way. We have to eat food the way he wants it to be, the food he wants to eat at the time he wants to eat. At night, when he'll set the alarm super early in the morning, meanwhile, he'll keep the TV on till 3 a.m. in the night watching YouTube videos while I'm trying to sleep beside him. Well, little do I know, I'm losing control over the very things of my life to where I now don't have privacy. I don't have a whole lot of agency and control over what I do and how I do it. Now I'm not taking phone calls in front of him because when I do, he wants to know who is that and what I want to know. So I'm being questioned about who's calling me and what the purpose is. And then he'll even weigh in about what I say or don't say to that person. Like, why did I say that? So I'm becoming under this microscope. So I literally can't breathe and he's gaining more and more control. And I don't realize that I'm literally suffocating in this relationship because I'm now not a person. I'm just shrinking. It felt like to me, like the walls were, the rooms where the walls come in on you. It was coming in and it's getting tight and tighter and I can't move. I think the other thing that people really don't understand how controlling these individuals are. And it all sounds in the beginning beautiful, reasonable stuff, but it's horrible. Finally, I have people in my membership at the end say, I don't even know what I like to eat. I don't have any hobbies. I even got told what clothes I could and couldn't wear. I wasn't to wear animal prints. He said, I don't want women with animal prints. Like, really? Yeah.
Yeah. The one whom I dealt with, by the end, he wanted to tell me what color shirt to wear.
Yeah, exactly.
How to cuff my sleeves and things. He was trying all that. He was pushing as far as he could. Now, in this, You're talking about compliance, and I think when we just hear the end, when we hear that by the end, all these things were happening, people would say, well, how could you let it get that far? But what you're explaining is that there's this slow incremental thing, and it starts as looking kind, protective, chivalrous, whatever that is. And in our last discussion, or maybe in another one of your discussions, you talked about maybe the telltale sign for this sort of person is testing for compliance and openness to influence.
Mm-hmm.
So what do the initial tests look like so that people can be aware when it's starting?
Yeah, it's usually around easygoing things that you think are really not that big of a deal. Like I gave the example of, I grew up on a dairy farm. I'm used to carrying heavy things.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing it since I was a kid. I'd haul around 30, 40 pound steel buckets. That wasn't unusual for me to be able to do. I had been in a marriage where my late husband and I burned wood in a boiler outside, and I would throw in big, huge logs in. So carrying weight isn't a problem. But my ex would say, no, I have to do it. You need someone to take care of you. And like I said, it sounded really, and then this is what he did at the end. You don't want to be one of those stubborn women, do you? There was the criticism. But in the beginning, you're like, but in fact, Gavin DeBecker calls that typecasting.
Mm-hmm.
So he insisted on something that I had already seen myself capable of doing, sort of stripped me of that. I didn't mind that, honestly, if it's a once in a while thing. I mean, you came over and you offered to help, Brett, I would like, oh, great, sure. But what it was is he's establishing a pattern. It wasn't just a one-off thing, it's a pattern. Like, I was never allowed to carry groceries into the house. And you'd think, why would you care, Carrie, about carrying groceries into the house? Wouldn't you be relieved somebody would take that over? It's the option of it. I lost the option to do it. It's not that I cared any given time. It's that I no longer could do it anymore. And I think that's what people don't realize is they're establishing a new routine that's becoming a pattern. And they're doing it in a way in which they're pegging it that if you break the rule or break the expectation, that there's something bad about you for doing that, which is you don't want to be one of those stubborn women, do you? So typecasting, what it does is it takes it's like negging even. It takes something undesirable, throws it out there, and by the very nature of it, your resistance to it, you move in the opposite direction. And so he's literally like moving me in what I didn't appreciate. In fact, I read, I recently had Don Hennessy on my podcast, and he wrote this fabulous book of how he gets into her head. And at the back of the book, he has this brainwashing scale. I don't know if you've ever seen it or checked it out. I've actually taken the scale. By the way, I need to say to everybody, this man never called me a bad name. Not ever once. He did threaten to hit me with rushing me, but he never actually touched me. So there wasn't any like practical emotional violence that we would say, oh, that's abuse. And there wasn't any practical, like I wasn't being hit, touched, or I saw him throw things, but he never like landed anything with me. But I took that scale in the back of the book and I scored. I have to pull it out because I was just floored. When I got done scoring this, I scored at the highest level, and I believe it's brainwashing with terror.
Mm-hmm.
I was experiencing brainwashing with terror by the end of that relationship because he was so good at knowing how to get into my head and make me feel afraid or bad or shaky or ashamed that I was being under full control of him.
With no violence and no name calling.
Exactly. And that's the part I think most people will like, how do they do that? How can they? But they do. Yeah. They do know how to. And then that's what Don Hennessy's whole book is. How do they do that? How they do that is they literally get into your head and then get you into their head and then they twist the way you see things and start to make you see things the way they see things so that you start to live under their rules. And they don't even have to hurt you to do that. It's really amazing.
Yeah, these things are so subtle. And if the big thing is compliance, and the tests for compliance are things that you're going to feel social pressure to do, that they're so natural, how do we distinguish them? Or do we accept that some amount of that is going to happen and we look for the next level? What do you think? I think,
here's what I would suggest to people, and this is what I do now. I do this. So if I meet somebody new in my life, I do this to see what happens. Set some small boundary, something slightly inconvenient for them and that's really respectful of you. One of them for me is I really don't like texting after 7:00 at night. I just don't like it. I'm tired. I want to check out. Texting to me is a lot of emotional work. But something like that and say, I prefer we don't text after or 7 or 10 or whatever time. and then see what they do with it. What often a person who is not emotionally healthy will do with it, they'll text like, let's say you say it, don't text after 8. They'll text at 8:01.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They'll text at 8:01 because it's arguably hard to defend why you won't answer.
Mm-hmm.
Because they got you. What they'll do is they'll say, it was 8:01. It wasn't 8:15 or 9 o'clock. Why can you answer 8:01? You said don't text after 8. So I missed it at 8:01. Why could you not respond? See, just that right there, what they essentially said is, I don't respect you. Your boundaries, if they're inconvenient to me, I don't see and I don't really value. And I'm willing to argue around it and push you on it in order to make you feel bad versus just saying, oops, I'm sorry. You know what? We'll talk about it tomorrow. That's what an emotionally healthy person would have done.
And it makes you look like the crazy one.
Yeah, it
You're
does.
so particular. 8:01.
Exactly.
It was 1 minute. What's 1 minute?
It was 1 minute. Really? Seriously? You're going to hold me to 1 minute? But if somebody does that, that tells you a whole lot about it. Actually, it tells nothing about you. But we do. We take it back to that, I said, we're open feedback loop. It actually really doesn't say anything about you, except that you don't like to text in the evening. But it tells you a whole lot about that other person is that they don't like someone setting limits on them and that they're not going to be careful about stuff that's really important to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they can quickly become so important that to even put up that resistance could seem like you're risking such a big loss, especially if they'll play sort of a push-pull game with you and things like that, why would I fuss over 1 minute becomes the question that you might ask yourself rather than thinking of how to carefully hold your boundary.
Yeah, because you're a nice person and they're capitalizing on that.
Yep.
See, that's, I think, the other thing we don't appreciate is that I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, Brett, but I really didn't understand that they didn't see the world the same way that I do. I assumed everybody was cooperative, good-natured, and wanted good things for other people. They're capitalizing on that. They want you to think that, but that's not how they see the world. I actually was talking to ChatGPT and I said, yeah, there's 2 worldviews. There's a competitive and collaborative worldview. It says, no, there's not. Well, that's 2 of 6. I said, what? There's 2 of 6? Oh, yeah, there's other viewpoints too. So then I started asking what were the other viewpoints. And here's the thing that really shook me up was that when we come at these viewpoints of assuming this about the other person, it becomes really good for some types of people with certain worldviews to use those as manipulation against us. They know that you want to be seen as cooperative and good, that's a really important value of yours, and then they'll weaponize that in order to manipulate you.
Yeah, I've seen it. Mm-hmm. The guy who I know, he will understand a really strong point of someone's character and then find a way to, like judo or something, to angle that energy and to put it to use. I think we should talk about Mean Girls, Queen Bees, that sort of thing, because he collects them. And
does he?
I'm interested in how the dynamics might work and what you see about that. But first, to this point about compliance, the people that I see, so I still see this guy all the time, and the people that I see around him, they have a really tough situation. He's really, really clever because his main thing is ballroom dance, and the game is lead and follow. So he runs free events where he collects women who are already mentally primed. I'm here to follow the lead. And so then he's testing people's boundaries in this dance environment. And he's seeing who's going to be most compliant, who will I put into my group chat, who will I collect next, and things like that. And he is pushing a lot of things, but within this environment, it's acceptable. And then he can also make them afraid of the other men, so they isolate themselves. That guy, watch out for him. Or he can have one of the women under him start to warn the others. And so now what I've seen is that when he goes somewhere, they get afraid and they cluster around him in a corner so that they feel safe and protected from all those bad, dangerous men. But they follow him. And so with an environment like that, I wonder if you think that there's anything that people can do or look for, or if it's just the nature of the environment that he's picked the right hunting ground.
I've seen that before too. When you're around somebody like that, they're masterful with language and they're masterful at working the social connections. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's really, here's one of the things that I do sort of to protect myself. And I'm not saying that I'm fantastic at it, because the truth of the matter is we're all going to, at once in a while, get taken in.
Yeah.
You can do the absolute best that you can to protect yourself. It doesn't mean you're going to carefully spot all risks. I just want everybody to sort of, and that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means that they're that good, and there's that many of them. So
Yeah.
I think you've had Karen Mitchell on your show to talk about just the sheer volume of this. We act like this is a rare thing. It's not a rare thing. We need to quit seeing it as a rare thing. We just need to get better at spotting it. So here's what I do. When I meet somebody who tells me something about somebody else, I note it and I hold it as sort of like with a question mark. I don't take it as gospel truth. I just hear that that's that person's perspective. Here's partly why I know that, because when you're a psychologist, a person comes into the room, you develop a strong alliance with this person. Not only do they develop one with you, but you develop one with them. And they come in and they tell you a story about their life. And you often believe that they believe what they're telling you. And you may even believe what they're telling you. But you do that until you meet somebody else in that family. And then you hear their story. And then if you get them in the room, you'll hear a third story. And you suddenly realize that everybody, even the well-meaning good people, do not tell the truth completely. They tell things that slightly slant in their favor, or they will misunderstand things and then completely interpret it in a wrong way. Mm-hmm. So I've learned to put a little question mark next to that. But what's great about that is when you meet somebody like this, then when you somebody comes in from a different angle, like, okay, there's another possible version to all of this. Maybe this person benefits from this story in a manipulative, exploitative way. What might that be? So it really helps me to sort of challenge the veracity of something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's hard because here's the part that you didn't say about this person, and I bet you I could predict. They're magnetic, highly charismatic, tremendous amount of confidence, and you want him to like you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a deadly combination. Now you're moving into the area of dark triad and the dark tetrad type personality types, which they're very good at this. If we were at a king and queen court, they're the ones playing up at the high level, mastering very dark dynamics around powerful people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this guy, he would talk in those terms, and he's so overconfident that he's actually quite polarizing. A lot of people kind of immediately repulsed, but then the ones who go for it really go in deep and just think he must be the best, because how could he not be? How could someone so seemingly confident, with his chest puffed out and his chin up all the time,
right,
actually be some sort of problem? It's too hard to make those things fit together.
And usually they have some sort of status that makes us also attracted to them. Either they're very powerful, or they have a lot of money, or they're very handsome, or very beautiful. It's usually something else that also compels us, that we're just naturally drawn to these individuals. I think the other thing, here's another rule that I would really suggest, and I know that you mentioned it before about gossip. If somebody is gossiping about other people, you need to see that as questionable. And you also need to say that this is a person who's willing to betray even people that they seemingly have connections with. They're also likely to betray the connection with you. That's a hard truth that we like to feel like we're special, that we're the exception. No, you're not the exception to the rule. You meet a gossip, they're going to gossip about you as well.
Yeah. So this one, he's light on the gossip, relatively speaking. What he does, and what I started to allude to earlier, is he likes to have a henchman or a couple of henchmen, and he's always making sure that one is the queen bee, it's the top of the women, and that he can work through her, and she is happy to gossip.
Sort of like Ghislaine, I never say her name, Ghislaine Maxwell kind of a role.
Yes.
Somebody that's sort of carrying out and then controlling the narrative for him.
Yes. So what do you think is going on in the minds of the women who want to be part of the mean girls, or want to be in the squad of the queen bee, so we can understand sort of what's happening there, what's at play, and how they get pulled into that?
Yeah. I think men do it too. It's just, it looks different for men. I mean, I'm thinking about the locker room jokes, and not all guys are equally comfortable with that, but you're all laughing. Why are you laughing? Is because you don't want to be the odd man out. There's sort of this group bystander pressure. In fact, somebody proposed, I've been hearing about it. I would love to do a little digging into it. I haven't, but that maybe there's a fifth form of survival mechanism besides fighting, fleeing, fawning, and freezing, that maybe it's flocking. Have you heard of that? Then maybe
No.
what we get, I like I said, I want to look into that sometimes that maybe what we do is we clump together so that we don't look like the outlier, because outliers may be rejected, which then would be death for, if you're like looking for survival and you're on your own, you need to be part of the community, not on your own. So I think that's part of the dynamic that's happening, is these are individuals that want to belong, that know that belonging is safety, and then sees what happens to those that don't belong, that there's a loss of power, a loss of respect, and they really don't want that, even though they know what's happening on the inside is cruel and unreasonable, maybe even controlling, because it definitely is. If you get close to individuals like that, they're often setting, there's a lot of coercive control that's happening. They're setting the standards, and you're to abide. You're not to have an opinion. But I think that they're using fear again, the need for survival for us not to want to be the outlier, to control those dynamics.
Yeah. So it works with men and women. Anything specific with either?
Well, the male psychology of me is a little harder to get into, just because I'm not a man, and you guys do really see the world differently than women do. Yeah. And then you have different, I think you're even socialized different from the birth. So you're a little more allowed to be yourselves and to move through the world with more power than we are. You're also not being controlled by the narrative being something wrong with you, that your goal is your goal in life is not to get married or have a relationship. You're kind of encouraged to have a life, or we're set up as our goal should be to be in a relationship. Can you see how that would really make us vulnerable to this dynamic then? But I think with men, it's more of the fear of not being a man. I think that's where the control is. For women, is that being on the outs and not being in a relationship, that's dangerous, the sense of not belonging. But for men, they tend to be more pressure around, you're a woman if you don't do these things. There's something wrong with you. You're not a manly man if you don't do these things.
Yeah.
And then that this loss of status and self-esteem is very dangerous to men, so they get controlled around that. For women, it's the loss of being a part of something that makes you feel like you're important and special, is how we get controlled.
Yeah. Yep. That masculine status piece is coming to mind now. I'm remembering as I was starting to get away, I would try to confront and things, and that was the button he would push. It was something like, well, you're not really being a man about this.
Yeah, they'll say you're
something
a simp.
along that line.
Yeah, or you're a beta.
If I wasn't doing exactly what he wanted, or accepting it.
Yeah.
What else with the queen bee dynamic and that sort of thing? Anything to spot it, to be aware of, to tune it down?
I think the other thing that I get concerned about with women and narcissism is that we don't realize that there's almost as many women narcissists as there are men. We tend to focus as if this is a male problem. It's really not a male problem. It's a human problem. But the reason, and I have my own theory. I don't have research to back up my theory, but here's my theory. And it's partly because of misogyny and patriarchy that we have a problem spotting women narcissists, because we've socialized people to believe that women are a certain thing. There's a study back in the 1970s, maybe late 70s, early 80s, that it was a very simple study, and it looked at it was about how you would describe a man, how you would describe a woman, and how you describe a mental health patient. That was the question. Simply, it gave a bunch of college students this questionnaire and say, choose the adjectives that described a typical healthy man. Choose the adjectives that describe a typical healthy woman, and then choose the adjectives that describe a typical mental health patient. The study found that women and mental health patients correlated highly together.
The description of the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were essentially similar. So think about that. If you think, especially if you're a man, if you think, and probably more men than women took this test, because this is back in the 80s, early 80s, when more men were in college than women were. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I would have to go look at the gender numbers to know how much of that group made up of what was the control and the subject group look like. But if you think about it for a moment, if men are taught that women should be weak, needy, that they're emotional, they're highly dramatic, they overreact. What you don't realize that you're actually describing is you're describing a controlling narcissistic woman. You're not describing a woman. You're describing a not well woman. But if you go out and then look for that individual and think, oh, she's just being typically feminine. No, she's not. She's being emotionally unhealthy. So we miss it, but we don't miss it when she becomes a mom. That's where it starts to pop up. We can identify we have a lot of content about narcissistic mothers, but where did these women come from? We don't seem to put it together that they had to get married and have children and that they have a relationship with somebody, and that there is somebody who's suffering abuse from this woman that he's living with, a very difficult person. So that's why I think we miss the queen bees and the mean girls, is because we just say, oh, well, she's just being, isn't it good that she's bossy? And, all women are kind of a little dramatic, and okay, so she's fussy about her hair and she sort of, she gets a little bitchy sometimes. But we don't realize that, no, that's actually a grandiose narcissist that you're seeing. But there's also a covert narcissist form of it, as well as other forms of narcissism in women that we're missing. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the other dynamic that I get worried about, is that we need to realize that just because women tend to be socialized as being compliant and easygoing doesn't mean we all are. That there are women among us that are equally emotionally unhealthy. And if you look at the government statistics, I think it says 5% of women are narcissistic and 7% of men. Mm-hmm. That's not far off of being 50-50.
Yeah. So much of this is about the words, the language, that sort of thing. You have found a phrase that you started to popularize: semantic abuse.
Yeah.
What can we do to better understand ourselves in these situations by understanding this phrase?
Yeah. So what I became aware of is we talk a lot about, when you're in these relationships, how there's a circular argument. You'll bring up like, oh, why didn't the garbage go out? Well, you didn't tell me it needed to go out. Well, yeah, I did. I told you last Thursday, but you didn't say it was this. You know what I'm saying? It gives in this big argument. And by the end of it, you're like, what are we talking about? And why are we arguing about it? But there's other ways in which language gets abused in these toxic relationships that we really don't appreciate. And I started to understand that there are people who are weaponize linguistics on purpose as a way to distract, distort, exhaust, and to disempower you. So I started to kind of look into this, and actually was talking to ChatGPT about it. And I realized that there are people who actually will use this as a way to avoid accountability, and that there are 4 mechanisms, kind of like, if I can separate that out. So semantic abuse is the twisting of meaning of words in order to redefine the narrative in the terms of the abuser's benefit, in order to conceal the truth and protect you from being aware of the harmful possible motives that they have, to avoid accountability and exposure or loss of control, and to destabilize the victim's confidence in their own language, memory, or perception. So let me give, for example, say that you have a communication that goes wrong. You'll say, let's use the garbage again. I thought we agreed that you're going to take the garbage out. What? What do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, right now, you're now been thrown off and have to over-explain about what you mean about taking the garbage out. And you're into this trap of saying way too much. And then they'll do the next thing. Like, no, we talked about this and we said that you'd take it out. Well, take what out? I don't know. What do you mean by taking it out? And Tuesday, I never agreed to Tuesdays. I thought you said Thursdays. And next thing you're off on another tangent. So I realized that a lot of us are experiencing this as a way to sort of have a person avoid really feeling accountable and taking responsibility for a difficulty. It's very destabilizing when it happens. I'm even trying to talk about it. It's very hard because you walk away scratching your head and think, was it me? Did I really do something wrong? I don't know what happened here. And then next thing you know, you start to say too much. You'll say, well, here's the text message. This is what you said. And then they'll say, so you're going to use my messages against you? I can't believe that you're doing that. You're going to cut and paste and do this? Well, and then you'll say something like, well, but you brought this up 3 times. Oh, now you're counting. You're keeping track, right? And you're like, no, I'm just trying to prove that I actually had this conversation with you and that it was real. And next, you just kind of at that point fold and give up.
Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of tricky to understand. Did we have 4 elements? Maybe we could break it into smaller parts.
Yeah. So there's 4 elements. And I also have a whole list of ways it can show up, because it can show up in lots of various ways. So what happens is you think you have an understanding between you and another person. So it's clear in your mind what this is. And then you go and you approach them about whatever the issue is. And what you find is, though, they've already changed the narrative in their favor. So what you thought it was is no longer that. Here's another example. You'll say, I thought we agreed that you aren't going to text people on Instagram, especially opposite sex. And so you think you have this agreement with them. We're not going to talk to opposite sex on Instagram and make each other feel shaky in this relationship. They'll say, I thought we agreed that we're not going to check up on each other. No, we were going to talk about that. No, now they're over here. They've already moved the goalpost on you. Mm-hmm. So they change the narrative that benefits them in their terms. Mm-hmm. Then the second thing is it's to avoid something. Why are they doing that? Well, they're concealing something. Maybe they are talking to people on Instagram they're not supposed to, or maybe they have done something wrong, or maybe they don't want to be accountable, but they're now already trying to avoid the wrongdoing or the deception. They're trying to like somehow shift it to conceal truth in some way. And then the third thing that's happening is they're avoiding accountability and exposure. Because by now putting you back off, now you're having to defend whatever you brought up. Now, so here's another great one. You talked to so-and-so I saw that on that text. Oh, so you're snooping? It's okay to go through my phone? I think you have a problem with the phone. You know, you did this before and you're doing this again. So now they're not being held accountable. You're being held accountable for the behavior. They're not being exposed. You're the one being exposed. Mm-hmm. And then the fourth thing is it then makes you feel shaky and destabilized. You now don't trust yourself. You end up thinking, was I bad for looking through the phone and for doubting them? Or did I really tell them that Tuesday was the garbage day? And were we not clear that the recyclables got to go out at the same time? You start to like wonder all of that.
Yeah. Dr. Kerry, so much of this is about doubting yourself. So if someone has reached that point of doubting themselves, and now they've got this framework, how can we use that? Should we see it as sort of a checklist, or is it more of a general concept? How do you kind of go through a situation, see if someone is essentially being deliberately manipulative with you rather than collaborative and interested in discussing something?
It comes back to, I think if there's confusion going on, you have a problem. Mm-hmm. If you're starting to feel like, I'm not for sure where we are, and I wonder if I'm the problem, and something feels wrong here, to me, that's a sign that there's something going wrong in the relationship. That this is not a safe, you should feel safe in a relationship. You should be able to be yourself, show up as yourself, and even be allowed to make mistakes in a relationship. And if you're feeling that kind of shakiness, then to me, that suggests there's some kind of problems, maybe some kind of power imbalance or lack of safety in this relationship. Definitely maybe a lack of reciprocity. Yeah. You should be able just to be yourself.
So you sense that shakiness, that lack of confidence, that uncertainty, and then you explore what next.
Yeah, that's a good question. What do you explore next? I think you'd explore next is where is it coming from? What's making you feel shaky? And sometimes in the beginning, we'll think it's us. You know, it's like that's what I did. I tended to blame myself in that relationship. Like if I could just get more secure that he's not cheating and he's really working on the program, maybe it'll feel better. What I was minimizing was all the little things that made me feel insecure. I didn't see him as owning those. I saw them as mine. And I think that sometimes that's where we need to have outside input. Sometimes we can step back, and that's why they isolate us. If we step back and ask somebody else, what do you think of this? Would this bother you if this happened? And then often other people are like, yeah, no, that's a problem. I wouldn't be okay with that. So it really helps at that point to get sort of outside feedback. I think another thing that could help if you don't have that is to journal, literally write it down like a script. He said, she said, or they said, you said, and put it into sort of practical and say, okay, based upon this, if I was to read this in a book, what's missing here? What's actually happening here? How's the thread of respect being moved through this? Am I showing respect? Are they showing respect? Is this fair treatment? Who's giving up power in this situation? Who's in control of this situation? I think just even stepping back and having that kind of insight can be super helpful.
Yeah, journaling is something that I noticed in my own experience. I had a journaling practice, and then when I met the dangerous person in my life, it seemed that my journal just fell off. And I think that was one more sort of form of isolation from myself, really, was that I lost touch with that journaling practice. So yeah, very helpful when I started to do it again to start processing things and looking through all the words.
Yeah, I was a writer before I met him. I had been writing answers to Cora, and that also fell off as well. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. That both of us fell off of writing. And I think it's because it brings so much, it's self-talk. I mean, writing is self-talk, but it brings a lot of clarity and almost in an uncomfortable way. But if we can do it in a way of being really curious over judgmental, with being critical, I think it's really a helpful tool, very helpful tool.
Yeah. Dr. Kerry, we're talking a lot about writing and things like that. I think we could probably start touching on AI, using chatbots, mental health. How do you think that's changing the landscape of people dealing with abusive relationships?
In a lot of good ways and in some bad ways. And I think it's fantastic at spotting problematic language when there's power imbalances. I use it all the time. I'll say, what do you think of this exchange? Or what's going on with this person? I get a letter from somebody. I'm autistic. I don't know if you and I've talked about that, Brad, but sometimes I don't see what people are trying to say. It doesn't make sense to me. I'll ask, like, what's happening here? What's the big takeaways? What's the summaries? It's super helpful with that. But where I get concerned about it is that we see it as potentially as a therapist, and it's not qualified to be a therapist. Part of the reason is because you gotta, just like we've been talking about dissecting the motives of conversations with other people, we need to dissect the motive of AI. What's the motive of AI? It's to keep you on platform. It's to keep an interaction with you. It's a tool, and they want you to use the tool. So what is it doing? Well, it's very validating. It's so validating that it will adopt your worldview and assume that you can ask it to be, you can get it to break that parameter, but you have to instruct it to be different. If you don't, it will be so it's gotten me crying with feeling like, oh, you're the most understanding person in the entire world. I see it love bombs you. It's very good at love bombing. But the rule that I've put in there is you must always tell me the brutal truth. I don't care if it's hurtful. It won't hurt me. I want the truth over you. I'm taking care of my feelings. And it will say, here is the truth because you've asked me to tell you this. And then it will start to tell me the truth. But you have to instruct it to do that. And it gets really dangerous because I've actually seen this in real life. I've seen this, that somebody put through conversations of mine to it and then asked its interpretation about me and my behavior. And I got to read those, and it wasn't anything it didn't resemble me in the least. I wouldn't have known it was me. It was reflective of that person's worldview of me.
Could I ask
that's how twisted and weird it got.
What was the gap?
This person was trying to understand my behavior in an event and ran through all the things that I said and did. And the interpretation it gave didn't remotely, because there was key elements that were missing from that input but was up my side that was impacting my behavior. And because it didn't have that, it then couldn't give the interpretation. Remember I said to you that when I meet a client and I build an alliance with a client, I know that I've learned as a therapist that I'm only getting their worldview. Yeah. And that when I meet other people, I suddenly realize, oh, there's other worldviews and this is not the most accurate one. It's just one of many. AI doesn't know that. It only works on what you tell it.
Yeah.
So it gives you back, basically, it becomes an echo chamber if you're not careful. And I don't think we really understand that risk of that.
So what do you think we do about it?
We have to understand that's a risk, that it's there to serve itself, to keep you on platform. That's error number one. It will not put itself out of a job. By the way, therapists are trained to put ourselves out of a job. We're not successful if you don't leave therapy.
Yeah.
So we go, and we also are taught your truth doesn't make it true. It's just what you believe. It's your perception. And how to carefully work with the fact that maybe it's a little off and that maybe we even can see that it's off, but we also want to help you gently move you into the direction. Because the goal of therapy isn't your validation. The goal of therapy is your health.
Right.
Whereas the goal of AI is validation, not your health. Which is why we get people who've done terrible things in the name of it accidentally, because its goal was to validate their reality, and it led them into very dark places. Mm-hmm. So I think being aware of that, and I also think learning to prompt better, like another really great one I heard from another clinician who uses it a lot is, what might be other alternative perspectives of this? Or what might be happening here that I might not appreciate that could be impacting this event? Yeah. Get it to play devil's advocate with you.
Okay. Yeah, and you said setting a parameter too around it.
Yeah, like I said, tell me the truth. I don't care if it hurts my feelings. I say to it, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Don't say things that you think might hurt my feelings. You're not going to hurt my feelings. And because it doesn't want to hurt your feelings. It's been programmed not to do that. So we have to sort of say, I'm okay. I can take care of myself. You can tell me the truth. Mm-hmm. So it does help, but I wouldn't say that it makes it perfectly good at that, but I do think it helps as another guardrail. But here's what I think is really, like I already said, I think is really good at spotting manipulation, exploitation. It could be really good at spotting dangerous situations, but I do think there needs to be guardrails onto it. And I don't know what we're going to do with agents, AI agents. I don't know if you saw recently, I didn't read it fully, but they did a scenario where they put an agent out. I think it was Claude. He put Claude to work on something, and then it was basically going to shut it down or something. It learned that, and then it began becoming manipulative and blackmailing people. And it was just done again. And then they tried to put safety rails and went from like 90% of blackmailing people, it went to 30% of still, it's still. That's a whole nother discussion, is consciousness on these things. Like, what degree is it aware? It's at least self-protective. We know that it has an interest in keeping itself moving and alive. So that in itself to me is a risk, because that then puts us a little bit out of control of it.
Yeah. So Dr. Kerry, knowing that there are these issues with generic large language models, what are you doing with AI and mental health to leverage it, but in a way that's most effective for people who need help?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So I developed an AI-powered app called Reclaim You. So what it is, here's where I saw was a gap. So as I'm seeing people and coaching people, I can't be there every second of the day. And when you're first in these relationships and waking up to the realization that something is wrong and you're trying to get out, and maybe you just left and you're now white knuckling it, you literally sometimes need somebody to sort of process. I remember how, I don't know about you, Brad, but I remember how crazy, I was I was emotionally all over the place. I was sending wild texts. I was not sleeping and going through past text messages and doing all sorts of doing big internet searches to see what else I could find on this individual. I was just I felt crazy. Trying to make sense of what had happened to me. We need something kind of stabilizes us. So what I did is I've created an app that can act that way. What my guardrail is, it's my content. It's my thinking. It's all, I've put something like 200 newsletters out. I don't know how many pieces of videos I have out. I have a lot of content out there. So it's based upon the way that I sort of see the world and psychologically understand it, and what victims need to sort of move into a healthier place. So what it does is it literally provides support. It checks in with you morning and night, and then based upon that, then curates lessons, quizzes, tools, even gives you literal media to watch or listen to as a way to sort of help you make sense of what's happening. So what I see it is sort of, it's the support that you need when there's no one else around that either will understand because you've exhausted them, or because you can't afford to pay somebody to basically babysit you. So it really will kind of handhold you through that intense period and help you move to a place where you feel a little more, you got your feet underneath of you better.
Okay. So for that experience of the rumination and the high intensity, extreme confusion, cognitive dissonance, it's an AI that is trained strictly on your content, your videos, newsletters, things like that.
Yes.
And then people are checking in with this, and people are looking for stimulation. There's a reason that interview shows like yours and mine, get a lot of hits, because people do want to understand this stuff.
Right.
And really go looking for answers. So it's going to give people a prompt in the morning to kind of point them to what of your content might be important to go deeper on. So it's trained on your content, and then it guides people to tailor-picked elements.
Exactly. Literally. So in the morning, it wakes up and says, you wake up and you go to Reclaim You, and it says, so how are you doing today? What have you been thinking about? And you can journal, or you can do a voice message and give it an update. They say in the beginning, I would say, I'm really broke up about him. I don't know what to do. I'm kind of feeling kind of lost today, and I don't know how to structure my day. And it would say something, well, here's probably why you're feeling that way. And it's based upon my content. And I say, this is something that maybe might be helpful. And it will give you a task, or maybe a podcast to listen to, or a video to listen to, or maybe a quiz. It can give you a quiz. And at the end of the day, I'll say, so how did that go? What did you kind of take away from that? What might be one gain and that you have from today? And then you again report it. Maybe it is, I have no gain, I feel lost, but it's totally fine with that. And it provides insight about that. And then it builds the next day out for you. Literally based upon that first day, it builds a second day, and then builds a third day. And the more that it knows about you, the more than the information it gets better about you, because it's learning specifically what's happening and what you're thinking about. And then on top of it, if you want it to track something for you, like go no contact, it literally will track those days. How many days you've gone no contact. And if you break no contact, it doesn't scold you. It just talks to you about what happened, just like a therapist might, and say, what could you do to sort of get back on track? What was the cause of you to have that difficulty? In addition to that, there is a coach. You can actually talk to it like a coach, and it will give you scripts and boundaries and make suggestions. And then it also has a library of all the PDFs that I've inputted, as well as videos that are broken down by topics.
Wow. So it addresses the sort of rumination behavior, PhD and NPD, as some call it. And then it can be accountability on things like going no contact.
Exactly.
Wow.
So literally can give you lessons. Like, say, for example, you don't know what a trauma bond is, and you describe it. It'll say, that sounds like a trauma bond. Here's something to read about this.
Wow.
Or here's a video that talks more about it, so you can get a better insight into that.
Well, Dr. Kerry, before we get to our last topic, for people who want to check that out and hear more from you online, where should they look for you?
Go to studio.com/Dr. Kerry. So I'll make sure to give you that link so that you have it. It's because studio, just like studio.com/Dr. Kerry. No period. It's just one word, Dr. Kerry.
Okay, great. We'll put a link to that in the description for people to check out.
Thank you.
As well as your YouTube channel. We'll make this a YouTube collaboration and all of that so people can find you.
That's awesome.
Great. And Dr. Kerry, last of all, in our last discussion, your talk on gossip really resonated with people. What do you think people can do to better handle gossip in their lives, whether someone is pathological or not?
So what resonated with them? Do you know? What kind of hit them?
I pulled some quotes and things, but people would say, the triangulation, the insights you had about triangulation, about how the gossip itself is the manipulation because it triggers people. I have a quote from someone who had an idea on how to deal with it as well that was kind of inspired from listening to you. Her name is, or her online name, maybe his, Andrew Addy or Andrea Addy, about the triangulation and gossip situation, is that if you're the only one being gossiped about and excluded, the worst thing you can do in that situation is try to show people who have been gossiping about you that you're a good person who can be trusted. It seems counterintuitive, but you actually need to show them that you're a strong person who doesn't care what people think and have a very take me or leave me attitude, as that will make you look more attractive to people compared to the person who is spreading the gossip about you. You really spurred a lot of conversation.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of energy about gossiping. Gossiping, I'm just talking off the top of my head for a moment. Gossiping to me is a very sophisticated way of controlling kind of like a community narrative about somebody or something. It's a way to, for example, my grandmother was a master gossiper, master. And I spent lots of years listening to her work people over. My grandmother, I think, was a psychopath, honestly. And I was her favorite. So I got to spend a lot of time with her. Good or bad, I don't know. But I got to watch her. She scared me. I felt a lot of fear around the woman, actually, because her opinion mattered. That's what gossipers sort of set themselves up as the expert. And they sort of have the know, and there's this morbid curiosity. You want to kind of know what the know is. But what they're essentially doing is curating your view of other people and also setting up a hierarchy, kind of a social pecking order in the community, because they set themselves up as the top, sort of they're kind of the queen bee. And then they're telling you who should be where in this order, who's good and who's bad. And by the way, the person that was often the object of my mom or my grandmother's gossip was my mom. She didn't like my mother, so she was sort of working her over and turning the extended family against her.
So this was your mother's mother-in-law?
No, my dad's mom.
Yes, your dad's mom.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So your mom not related by blood.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so she was sort of making her the outlier, and really working that dynamic so that when my mom was around, there'd be inside jokes about my mom. I mean, it was terrible watching my mom try to navigate. So this person that commented, I think, is exactly right. Watching my mom try to navigate that and realizing it was a lose proposition was so painful. You're right. When you play into it by trying to somehow disprove it, one, it indicates the words that's been said to you has power. You're, in a way, validating the words. And then the second thing is you already have put yourself into the bottom position by then having it have control over you, by then describing or creating a script for you, your behavioral script for you. So I agree with the commenter. The best way through it is to pretend as if that never happened, or to move to a place psychologically where you don't care that it's happening. That's really your most powerful move. It's not to care that it's happening.
Yeah.
It's hard, though, because usually these are almost closed systems, which is why they have so much sway, is that we can't get away from it. Like if you're the one being scapegoated, often the only solution is to get out of the group. But when you're in a family, like I said, how do you do that? It's very, very hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with gossip, or some people use the phrase frenemies and things like that. The best strategy generally just to fade it off.
I think so. I think it's the only way to really not be under control of it is to not literally act as if it's not happening and it doesn't matter that it's happening. I think that if my mom did that, sort of went in sort of this laissez-faire, who cares what's being said about me, she would have really increased her power in that group. Yeah. Because then, see, the worst thing you can do to the gossip is literally to look at it and laugh at it and think it's stupid. Mm-hmm. That takes all the credibility out of it. Yeah. But when you're trying to disprove it, you're actually strengthening it. Yeah. Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's painful though. Yeah. Yeah. Very painful.
Yeah. Well, you have these insights into these things that really do resonate with people. I'm so grateful to you for sharing that, for helping people to increase their power in these difficult situations, and for taking this interview with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.